I'm Celine Williams, and welcome to the Leading Through Crisis podcast, a conversation series exploring resiliency and leadership in challenging times. Hi, my guest today is Evie Sanders, who is a certified career coach who teaches creative types how to find their thing and design their careers so they can achieve the fulfillment they really want. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Celine.
I'm really excited to talk about this because I think that we were chatting right before we hit record, because that's what we do, I had this perception and conception that things would be really busy with people who have lost their jobs right now and are transitioning. And you were commenting that that's not necessarily all of your people. And I think that's a really interesting place to start as we talk about leading through change and crisis and resiliency and all of that. So I'd love to hear your perspective on this whole concept and idea and your experience with it.
Absolutely. So my main client base is people who are looking to change their careers or to make major changes in their career to create the one that they really want it to be. And when this pandemic hit, and in California, we've had one of the strictest lockdowns of anybody, right? I had to do the adjusting along with anyone else, but mine, I was in a good place because I've been working from home already for several years. I had all of that ready to go. My new clients at the very beginning were people who were really struggling just at the beginning of, how do I even do this? And so I got a few new clients of just trying to get them settled into how to be a leader from home and how to work efficiently from home and how to do the best that they could be. But as we've gone on, as this has just progressed and gotten longer than longer, I expected, like I think many did, that my clients, like you said, would have come from having lost their jobs, having been laid off, whatever the reason being, but that hasn't been the case. The bulk of my clients are just like the rest of us who have had to take a step back and reevaluate what's truly important to us, reevaluate how we live our lives and why we're doing the work that we're doing. And once they were forced to get off of autopilot of get up, get on the train, go to work, go to the meetings, come and just doing it over and over, once they had to have the time to think, and it was really forced on everybody. My client base now is mostly people who have, during that reassessment, realized that not only did they not like what they were doing, where they were doing it, but they genuinely weren't fulfilled. They were not happy. They weren't enjoying doing the work that they were doing at all. And they felt sort of doubly lost because not only did that realization hit them of they didn't know what they wanted to do and they didn't like what they were doing, but they lost the routine. They lost the structure of just how to sort of function in a regular workaday world. So my clients now are struggling with a lot of the same things my clients previously were, but it's much more layered in a way than it had been earlier. Earlier, I would have to explain to people that these are things they should assess and that they really need to dig deep and understand, how they want to be and who they want to be. Now that's what they're coming to me with, is they've been forced to sit in this work. So it has been surprising to me and also really great to work with people who are coming to me with this understanding already.
I think it's really interesting how, when a crisis, because it's like a global, everyone is experiencing this type crisis, right? But it's really interesting that in a situation like this, it's the time when people start to have those moments of realization. And, I'm big on self-leadership, right? Like knowing yourself, leading yourself, having all that insight. They start, not everyone, but a lot of people, it's when they start doing that work. And it sounds like you're seeing a lot of that in the people that are coming to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of my client base prior to, and in the US, we also have our political crisis on top of our racial crisis, on top of our pandemic, right? It has really made people reevaluate how they're living their lives and what they're doing with the money they're making and how they're acquiring that paycheck, who's signing those. So it is this evaluation where before, you had your commute, right? And that might have been your only time of the day that you really had a little bit of time in your head to sort of prepare for your day and think about you and yourself and what you were planning, where now you don't even have that for the most part. So you are sort of in it and in it all day. There is no off, there is no going to, even if you have a separate home office, there's still very little separation. We're very much living at work, but also working in a very different way and just spending all of the time with our family. Or if you are solo, you're spending all of this time in your own head. And it is just a time for everyone to sit and think, whether they want to or not. It's sort of being foisted upon us. And a lot of people are inadvertently doing this work, which is really helpful, but can also be really scary, especially for people who sort of have just been following a definition of success that had been placed before them. People have been climbing the corporate ladder, people who've been stepping into leadership and C-suite roles. Those things were just always sort of pre-outlined and pre-scheduled. And that was sort of, you did that because that's what you did. And now people are really questioning if that is even what they want. And if it is, why they want it and how they want to get it. And while yes, it's a reaction to a crisis, I find in a lot of ways it's an opportunity to be really proactive for how we're going to be working in the future. Because I think it's pretty obvious. We all know that we will return to some sense of what it was like previously, but the working world will never be exactly the same. It just can't be, right? Yeah. So people really are being proactive in a lot of that decision making and redefining what their version of success looks like, and which is really new for people. I think I think a lot of people had the idea that only, the very, very top echelon of corporate world could define what that was for themselves. And people are realizing that now that not only can they, but they most likely should be defining that for themselves now, so that they know what they're working towards and why they're working towards it.
So I'm really curious. I'm making an assumption here. You please correct me. I'm going to call it out. I'm assuming that is part of the work that you would normally do with someone, is really helping them figure out, redefine success for them. Pre-pandemic, that was sort of a standard piece of what you would do.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But it was difficult. A lot of times it was like pulling teeth. I would ask them what their definition of success was, and I would get back basically like a mini mission statement of whatever corporation they were working with. A lot of, especially because I'm in the Silicon Valley and many of my clients are as well, there's a lot of drinking the Kool-Aid here. We get indoctrinated into where you are, and the culture that breeds. The definition of success is, well, obviously you own a home in San Francisco and you own a Tesla and you have a summer place or a winter place in Tahoe and you're making a certain monetary figure. And of course you've got a nanny and 2 kids. But that's one very small version of success. It's one, and it's, let's be honest, majority, it's a white male traditional definition. And people are now questioning why that has to be. Whereas before I had to lay it out as an exercise and we would have to, do some actual written homework. Now people are coming to me with having these thoughts, and my job now is more helping them organize those thoughts rather than getting them to the point where they're thinking about these things. So yeah, that is very new, but it is always the core of my work, is not just helping them start to think about what they truly want, but how they want to do it, because you also may want the same types of things, but you don't have to do them in the same way at all anymore. And I think that's been a really nice big shift I've seen in the last 5-ish years, this opening up of, oh, hey, there may be other pathways. There may be other ways to do things. Traditional education and pieces of papers and third-party proof that you have done something that gets you to a next step no longer holds the weight that it used to. And so I think, well, yes, I think I will always have to do this work with clients. I will always have to help them get to what that definition is for themselves. I think how people are thinking about it is different now.
So this is really interesting, because I was having a conversation with someone earlier today I'm based in Canada, and they're Canadian, and they run a no longer startup, but quite well-funded company. And we were talking about how the experience of finding work before they started this business in Canada, looking for roles with an MBA and with a lot of that social proof, and how challenging it was, because if it wasn't a linear path from the organization standpoint, they weren't interested in even talking to this person. And I wonder if, because, and I love, by the way, that you encourage people to think about things differently and step out of that paradigm, and that people are coming to you now stepped out of that paradigm more than ever. I think that's really important. I'm curious if you're seeing organizations responding to that or leading that or stepping back, or because we were talking from a Canadian perspective, but I'd love your thought on that, because I think that's a big piece of it's a really important part of the changing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so I was a recruiter before I became a career coach, and I was always an advocate for the nonlinear. I was always an advocate for the person with the outside voice, different experience, a wider base of knowledge, because that leads to more insight, different language, ways that you're always going to reach the solution to a problem in a different, better way. I was always a huge proponent for that. And in the US, we have this sort of narrative that we love, the pull yourself up by the bootstraps, the outliers, what's going to get things done. First of all, physical impossibility to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. But it is, we have this narrative that we like the guy with the new strange idea. But no, traditionally in the corporate world, it has also been this linear path, with the MBA, with all of that. And I don't think that will ever go away. I really don't. But I think now people are seeing that there is opportunity in the people who didn't follow that path because of the differences of ideas. And from a strictly money-making standpoint, which, let's be honest, every decision made in a business is a money-making decision, right? They're realizing that when you reach other audiences through problem solving in different ways, which usually means not hiring the person who's gone on the linear MBA path, you make more money because you're reaching people where they're at. And so I think it will and is changing. And as we've seen now, since all corporations have been forced to, finally put in the infrastructure that we always knew was available, that you don't have to have someone's butt in a particular seat in a particular location, they now are, and I'm already seeing it, they're already opening up, talent pools in smaller locations where we wouldn't have accepted them from before, because it's like, oh, well, they're not white, they didn't get the MBA, they don't live in a major metropolitan area. Well, obviously they're not a culture fit for us. That is already changing. So while I'd like to say that the US has a different view than that Canadian sort of take, I think we love the story that we do, but I don't think we truly have, but we are moving towards that. Yeah. I think it's safe to say, yeah.
So I appreciate your perspective on that. It's interesting. I think that I love DEI work and the idea of bringing in various lenses and viewpoints for exactly what you're saying, which is the biggest thing to me is that diversity of thought and that diversity of experience, and not just the echo chamber of sameness. And so I think that there's I think there's a real opportunity, and what I hear inside of what you're saying is that there's this real opportunity to expand that out from what I think a lot of companies do and what a lot of people think of diversity, equity, inclusion, whatever you want to call it, like whatever your term for it is, what they think it is versus what it really is, which is like a whole next level.
Oh yeah. A lot of corporations do this. Oh, we're going to expand, we're going to reach new audiences. Well, look, we've made a few diversity hires. Great. You've brought them into a system that was built to keep them from succeeding. How is that? If you include them in that system, it's still that system. So they have to go deeper than just bringing those people in, or just even saying they're going to listen to those voices or go after that market, whoever it may be. It is truly about changing the fundamentals of how they're solving problems, who they're, tapping to solve those problems, and what they're doing with those solutions at the end. And some companies are doing better with it than others. Some people are allowing their leadership, kind of roles to change the look, not just the look, but how they function, which I think is the linchpin there. The functionality has to change. You can't just listen to the voices. If you collect all that data and you do nothing with it, it's pointless, right? So changing and giving leaders, or maybe, and I'm a huge advocate of creating leaders, whether or not they've got the title, and
Yes.
allowing them to have agency and to feel that they have some, agency to actually make change and to discuss things with stakeholders and genuinely make change to internal processes that will affect their end products.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you just bring them in. If you don't change how you allow them to work, it will come to naught.
So I do a lot of work with culture, right? With organizational culture and changing organizational culture. And I love what you're talking about, because this is why I have a podcast on leading through change, right? Like, I love this type of thing, because so often the culture piece is a checkpoint. It's a check mark, right? In a box. Like, oh, we have words on a wall and a ping pong table and we do events. We have great culture. And it's like, how do you guys actually operate, and how are you, what are the rules around when, listen, I full and rules, but I fully appreciate that there are some things that someone else needs to make a decision around. I get that. But inside of every role, there's also the opportunity for people to make decisions and take ownership. So how are you explaining that, and what does that look like, and how does this all function together, and what is a sandbox that we are all playing in? What is that sandbox? And it's really interesting, because I am curious with what you're seeing, not only the work that you're doing, but what you're seeing in your experiences. Are more companies really starting to think that way, or is it industry specific? Because I'd imagine, and I'm so comfortable being wrong, but I'd imagine in San Francisco, because there are a lot of Silicon Valley startups, that they're more mindful of the realities of that than maybe other parts of the country.
That is really interesting. I deal with people in a lot of different markets, and in different fields. And I would say it's really interesting, because New York, which you think of as this like innovative outlier, they are genuinely the most traditional. My clients who are in New York are stuck in these old patterns, especially if they work in any sort of media. They are stuck in these just entrenched old, like, it's like the guys who run the railroads started these media companies, right? So, and they still function that way, which boggles my mind, because I do approach it very much from this, I'm in the land of disruption and innovation, which a lot of times is lip service, not trying to pretend it's not. But I do find where people don't give enough credit is to like the Chicagos and the Austins and the Iowas, the whole state. Very, very different ways of thinking and being, but a lot of amazing ideas and a lot of just normalcy of difference of opinion. I never think difference of opinion is a bad thing. I wouldn't say it's field specific, but location definitely has an effect. And Canada is just as big as the US. There's a million ways to do anything in both of our locations. But I think there are various stereotypes that work and don't work, and a lot of times work against what you think you might be able to do in a certain place. But I want to hope that it's changing. I really do want to hope that I see that. And I do see it in certain places. I've got a couple clients who are, they're in other fields other than tech here in the Bay Area, and they see a lot of the same issues. They see a lot of, they made quote unquote diversity hires, and then these poor hires are not set up for success in any way. They're just sort of plunked in and then expected to do their job, as well as, here, educate everyone else on how to deal with you appropriately, quote unquote. It's so unfair in such a blatant way that I don't know how it continues to exist, because then it affects their job performance, obviously, because now you've tasked them for 2 jobs and you're underpaying them for 1. So while I see companies across the board in all fields, in all regions, making overtures, I think it's pretty, we know there's so much work left to do. That's why I think locations like Atlanta are amazing, where so many Black entrepreneurs have just opted out of the white run systems. And, okay, you don't want to fund my project? Cool. I will take the money it will generate elsewhere, and have really built this amazing supportive network, which should have existed that they shouldn't have had to create on their own, but they did. And, they are out, there's some tech companies, sure, but there's also, fashion companies and, media and everything going on. So we know it's doable. Clearly the system is just broken to get there.
So it's almost like there's like I'm going to use the term scrappiness that comes from not being a major hub that allows you to think about things differently and approach things differently. So it's like resiliency in humans, right? Or grit or whatever, use the term scrappiness. Yeah. But if you, sometimes out of necessity, more than anything, you end up being the person that, like the entrepreneurs in Atlanta you're talking about, that are leading the way for other people.
Yeah. And I think, unfortunately, that's really common. And if you just look at, kind of anything, any market, any housing market where an underrepresented community will go in because it's the only place open to them, because rents are cheap, or, labor is less expensive, or materials are just more readily available, then they turn it into something amazing. Then the old guard comes in, is like, oh, look at that, cool, let's just get our hands on that and let's buy that up and snap that up, and then drive the people who created it out, which I'm hoping against. I don't know, hope it's not against hope. I'm hoping that these strongholds are allowed to stay strong. You see it over, in real estate, you see it in business all the time. This is not a new concept, but I'm hoping now that kind of localized powers have been slightly dispersed. And that, we've seen a huge flight here from people are just moving all over back across country, because there's a lot of people who were, quote unquote, forced to live here to work in the tech industry who didn't ever want to live here. And now they've been able to move and take their skills and their expertise and maybe their culture and maybe their family and go do something else somewhere else. And I hope that has chips away at the armor of the old guard a little bit.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you're seeing that. I think that's I'm not surprised given the expense of the Bay Area and I know a lot of people that moved there not because they wanted to, but because of the job opportunities. And it's like, it's great that they don't have to be there anymore.
Yeah. And it should have been this way for a long time. And a lot of us have been jockeying for people to hire outside of the market. There's no need in 2021 for you to have to sit next to someone unless you're working on a physical product with them where they need their hands on it. There's no reason for that anymore. And hopefully now this will have forced some change of thought, forced some change in the system. And now if you can afford a Chromebook, something very inexpensive, you can create something anywhere. And not that entrepreneurship is for everyone, not that leadership is for everyone, but the idea that it's doable is for everyone. And so hopefully traditional corporate structures will understand that they can move outside of their normal, candidate funnel. They can look out into other pools of talent that just would not have had a chance to be seen before. And I think everyone will be better for it.
It's an interesting challenge because if I think about companies, even ones that I've worked with, that over the, a number of years now that have gone remote or done some version of hybrid pre-pandemic and also out of necessity in 2020. The challenge has often been not the going remote itself, but how do you work in a different environment? How do you hire in a different scenario? It's the structures that they have in place. You can't just transfer them to remote. You can't just hire the same way remotely that you do in person. Candidates show up differently remote. Like there's both from the company and the individual perspective, it's a different experience.
Absolutely. And I do consulting with companies who are really struggling to find and retain hires because it's very expensive, right? And once I pin them down on, okay, this is what you say you want in a candidate, what do you actually want? Because those are 90% of the time two very different things. Then we do talk about what the system looks like now in terms of hiring, because I, very early on when I started consulting during the pandemic, and in this exact topic, I had a company say, "Oh, we liked the candidates we were getting, but we've already had 2 interviews and we couldn't hire either of them because they weren't wearing a suit." which is they were so used to people coming into their financial district downtown office wearing a suit that they could not even wrap their minds around the fact that it would have been a little strange for someone to be sitting on their couch with their Zoom setup in a suit, and they weren't even willing to look past that. Whereas the candidate thought it would have, been much more appropriate to be slightly casual, more casually dressed, right? They were doing what they felt. I mean, so something as simple as just what a candidate is wearing versus much of the old guard. I was working with a company who, even though in California, we've been on one of the strictest lockdowns anywhere, we were like on house arrest until today. You could not leave your home. I had a company where the owner, CEO, refused to hire anyone that he had not met in person. And it's not a very large company, about 40-ish people. So not a crazy expectation, but right now, absolutely absurd expectation.
Yeah.
But he was expecting to fly candidates across the country and have them like go sit out on a park bench to meet him. And he could not he wasn't trying to be intentionally obtuse. He just, in a very real way, could not wrap his head around the fact that A, could not happen, and B, that he needed to figure out a different way for him to get the chemistry understanding that he was looking for, just, but with meeting someone over video and looking at different types of candidates. Because one of the reasons I was called in is that they only had one employee of color. And of course, he was male. So it was like, we're still working on it. It is still a struggle for him to understand. And there, unfortunately, at a certain level, there isn't anything you can do to make the stakeholders who have the ultimate power understand. There's nothing you can do. You can get them to understand that there are limitations in place and how to best work within those limitations. And for certain hiring managers at certain levels, it is going to be presenting them, if you are the hiring manager, HR director, recruiter, presenting them with it as close as an experience as you can possibly get to what they're used to, and coaching the candidate that that's what they're used to seeing. Thankfully, so many millennials are in hiring roles at this point. That isn't quite as big of a problem as it, for them. They're used to doing so much via the internet that they're tired of it. They're bored with it. They wish it was different, but they know how to work within its confines in a much different way. So I find that to be much more of a generational issue. And unfortunately, there is a certain point where there isn't a lot you can do other than, getting them to understand, presenting the best experience you can. But I find millennials make great hiring managers right now. I feel that if you don't, it'd be strange if you didn't have a hiring team that was packed with them at this point. But if you didn't, ask them for their expertise, ask them how they handle it, use the people that you have to make the experience as good as you can for both you, your team, and your candidates. If you want the best candidates, it's not just about, the pattern that they've taken to get there, but it's about setting them up for success from the interview forward.
I love that. I'm going to change tack a little bit, and I want to ask, so inside of everything that you're saying and inside of your experience, I hear you deal with leaders a lot, right? This is whether they're company owners, whether they're leaders in organizations, whether they're individual candidates. I hear a lot of you dealing with leaders, and I'm wondering, from your perspective and experience, what makes a leader successful these days with all of the constant nonstop change that we are challenges, unknown that we're all dealing with? What do you think makes them most successful these days?
I find that the most successful leaders, no matter what their title, if they are crystal clear on the outcome that they're working towards, they can just make it work with changes, with reversals, with complete upheavals. It's being crystal clear on what the outcome is and getting the team to agree that that's what they're all working towards. And once they've got that and they've got everyone in agreement there, then it doesn't matter what little changes come up in between or personality conflicts, you're all on the same team working towards the same goal, and everyone is working towards that goal, and it is understood. And I find once they can clearly define that, whether it's something really simple, an agenda for a meeting versus taking a new product from, ideation to launch, if they know crystal clear what that is and they can communicate that, they will do great.
I love that you said an agenda for a meeting, because I was just thinking, how many leaders do I know who that is not a
and it's very literally everyone's pet peeve.
Yeah.
Not having one, or having a very clear one that everyone knows what they're expected, and then just obliterating it and and going in with something out of left field. It just throws everyone off. They've been focused on this discussion, and all of a sudden they've got to make it stop and a reverse track, and it just takes so much more time to refocus. It is so much more detrimental than just not having the meeting.
Yep. It is a pet peeve of mine how we tend to do meetings, and how everyone has problems with them and thinks they can do better, and yet no one actually does better.
Yeah, ever. Yeah, it's shocking, because you're right, everyone thinks they could do better. I even worked at an agency once that had a list of rules for meetings, and they laminated them and they put them on every table, every surface where a meeting could be held around, and everyone was have a clear set agenda and on time. And it's like simple rules, like we're all in the same sandbox, let's share the Tonka truck. No one could follow them. It is shocking.
Yeah, it's and I will say this, and I don't know if this has been your experience, but I will say that if nothing else, this stay-at-home orders, the quarantining, the people working from home has highlighted just how bad how poorly most companies run meetings.
Oh, absolutely. And it's interesting, because it's a lot of stories and anecdotes that I use in my work. The moment I knew I needed to leave corporate world myself and work outside of it, is when I found myself in a meeting about a button on a website.
Yep.
Yeah. And if I remember correctly, it was like an hour and a half long meeting, and it was again about a meeting. Yeah, and it was one of those where I was like, this isn't how humans are meant to spend their time.
Yeah, yep. Wow. That might be one of those meeting stories that I'm going to tell people about. I will give you the credit, but be like, let me tell you a story about a meeting about a meeting about a button on a website that happened.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think hopefully this is one of the good things that comes out. People realize you don't all have to be in a room going through all of these nuts and bolts and all things, because generally those meetings were just super, super top level, barely actually getting into the process of anything anyway. Great. Send a quick video explaining what you need from your entire team, shoot them the video, done. Right? There's new ways to do things, and it can be done efficiently, cleaner, quicker, more engaging. People can actually get the information they need. It's shocking what technology can do these days.
It's very true. So I'm going to kind of get to wrapping this up. I want to be respectful of your time. And when you hear the term or the idea leading through crisis, what does that mean to you? What comes up for you inside of that?
Leading through crisis to me is about the people. I think to truly lead, that it's not about the company objectives in terms of profit. I think to lead, go back to what that word means. You're leading people, right? Go back to your people. If you can make sure that you are leading your people and caring for them and taking care of their needs in terms of your work, as well as just them as human beings, and you have that empathy, there will be nothing that you can't do at the corporate level, because they will be behind you, because they know that you genuinely care about them as people, not just cogs in your system. But you have to start with remembering that you're leading people.
I love that. I think that is a really powerful place to wrap this up, because I don't think there's anything more important for leaders to remember than they're leading people. Thank you for chatting with me, Evie. It's been really lovely. We will You can find EB online at ebsanders.com. She has a course, Career Change with Confidence, that you can find more information about there. All the links will be in the show notes for this. I really appreciate you taking the time to come and chat with me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Celine. This has been so great.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining me today on the Leading Through Crisis podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, please take a minute to rate and review us on your podcast app. If you're interested in learning more about any of our guests, you can find us online at www.leadingthroughcrisis.ca.